Oh my god, what are you doing now?
Oh, this is not what it looks like. This is for the channel.
I am just really over this.
But no, we're doing stalker movies this week. Stalker movies. It's for the channel.
Why?
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all of the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and notorious modern horror films. If you're new to the channel, I recommend you check out our introduction video. There's a link to that in the description below. It'll give you a pretty good idea of what the Horror Movie Syllabus is all about. Basically, we take a look at a particular subgenre of horror, and then we pick 3 movies from that subgenre to explore. And today, the subgenre that we are exploring are stalker films. Films about stalkers. And this is kind of I guess I'll call it a loosey-goosey subgenre in the sense that there are a lot of horror movies that fit under a lot of different subgenres that have a stalking element to them. There is a lot of different kinds of stalker movies, if you will. So this is an incredibly broad subgenre, so it's a little hard to figure out what deserves to be here representing the syllabus when you have so many other stalker movies that you've probably already used in other places in the syllabus, which is absolutely true in my case. As you know, longtime viewers of the horror movie syllabus know, we've used a lot of movies that have, that are commonly well-known stalker movies in other subgenres. So things like Fatal Attraction and Single White Female and The Strangers and Unsane, and even like Halloween and a lot of the slasher movies are also stalker movies, and we've already talked about them. And as you know, with this horror movie supplement, which is what we're talking about today, we're not going to repeat talking about movies we've already talked about in the past. I'm forcing myself to come up with new movies to talk about. So the movies we're talking about today are the movies that kind of didn't find a place in the original horror movie syllabus. It's like they didn't quite fit into a particular subgenre from the syllabus super well because there was no stalker subgenre. So now there is one so that we can talk about them. And so as a result, the movies that we're looking at today are more representative of stalking, in my opinion. They're more having the stalking front and center, or at least reputationally speaking, are known as being stalker films. It's really like kind of the main idea or threat being pushed in the movie. And it's maybe kind of again a blurry distinction here because again a lot of these stalker movies and slasher movies kind of overlap quite a bit along with a number of other subgenres. And so what are we looking at here? Well, I guess what we're trying to look at is movies where the fear of impending violence is really what the movie is kind of banking on or riding on, more than the actual violence itself. Like when you're looking at a slasher movie, for example, the kills are the thing. And I think in these movies, a lot of times it's not really so much the kills, the creativity of the kills. It's really that anticipation, that knowledge that somebody's after you and the way they're terrorizing you. And, in this subgenre, we're going to see a lot of different kinds of stalking. The stalking phenomenon or the stalking crime gets displayed or portrayed in a variety of different ways. And so I felt like we did a pretty good job today of getting a kind of comprehensive smorgasbord, if you will, of different kind of stalker movies. I'm really looking forward to it because these are really great movies. Now, I'm going to upfront tell you, some of these push the boundaries of what we call a horror movie. And I think a lot of them would be called maybe thrillers or even arguably dramas, but we're going to get into that a little bit later. But suffice to say, that's maybe somewhat of why these movies weren't talked about previously is maybe some of them people might not consider to be horror, but us here at the Horror Movie Syllabus, we are broad in talking about what we think everything is horror, basically. We're all inclusive here. So we're going to count it as horror because they're good movies, they're worth talking about, and they've got that stalker angle nailed down pat. So as usual, we're going to rank today's movies in undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate levels in increasing order of quality this time. So they're going to get increasingly better as movies go on. So this should be a lot of fun. So let's go ahead and lock our doors, close our blinds, and check out these stalker movies. The first stalker movie that we're looking at today, the undergraduate level selection, is Fear. Fear came out in 1996 and stars Reese Witherspoon and Mark Wahlberg, and was a bit of a surprise big hit, or at least a modest hit, that was aimed at the MTV crowd, a teenage crowd. And it's funny because it's kind of a dark and serious movie, but it winds up being kind of unintentionally campy. And that's what makes it kind of stand out and kind of endures a bit of a reputation movie to this day, but we're going to get into all that in just a minute. First, if you haven't seen it before, the movie is about a well to do family where the teenage daughter, played by Reese Witherspoon, is a good girl but likes to brush up against rebelliousness a little bit. She goes out with her wild friend to parties and gets herself to situations that may be a little bit dangerous, and everything's pretty much fine and normal until she meets a young man played by Mark Wahlberg who seems charming and nice and good looking and friendly. He even wins over the family, and everything seems cool until she starts to see that he's got a bit of a dark side to him. And when she tries to break things off, it doesn't go well, and he won't let her go. He won't leave her alone, and things start to escalate more and more and more until they start to get dangerous and downright outrageous. And we'll stop there so as to not spoil things for you because the hijinks go fast and furious at that point. But the movie itself is interesting because it does go dark and it does go serious, and that's both its problem and part of why I love it. Let me explain. So the movie is kind of ridiculous. It's got a premise that is a pretty grounded premise. Good girl meets bad boy, not quite what he seems. And then when he gets rejected, doesn't take it so well and starts to act out and do things, that are not very good. It's all grounded. It's all very realistic. But then as the movie goes on and things start to escalate, it gets more and more ludicrous and it's hilarious, but the movie never plays it for laughs. It never leans into the campy nature of the movie, which I think a lot of people would think is to its detriment. I think that people think that maybe this movie would be more fun if it did just kind of lean into the camp factor. But for me, I kind of love that they play it dead serious because they've got a movie that's being made really, really well. It's got a solid director. It's got a really good pacing. It's got a script that is decent enough, if not necessarily the sharpest of dialogue. It's definitely a story that rings true and has enough reality grounded aspects to it that it feels like a solid story. And you've got a great cast led off by Reese Witherspoon, of course, and then Mark Wahlberg early in his career. I think he'd only done like Basketball Diaries, maybe Renaissance Man or something like that. So early in his acting career, I should say, he was already a famous rapper at this point. And again, they're aiming this at the MTV crowd, the young teenagers, so they're definitely trying to play off of that a bit. And it's also got William Peterson as the dad, Amy Brenneman as the stepmother, Alyssa Milano is the best friend. You all know how much I love Alyssa Milano. William Peterson, of course, does great work. We talked about him in Manhunter. So it's got a really strong cast, and everybody's bringing their A game. Everybody's doing a really solid job here, trying to play this very straight, very serious, even though the story really doesn't deserve that. It doesn't deserve everybody's best. But I love that they're doing it. I love that they're bringing it that way and taking it super seriously because to me, that just makes it that much funnier, that much campier. And let me be clear, there are aspects of this movie that are wildly uncomfortable. There's some sexual assault stuff with Alyssa Milano's character. There is this whole thing where her character is flirting with William Peterson, the dad, and he's kind of checking her out, like that. That's really uncomfortable. It was uncomfortable then. It's super uncomfortable now by today's standards. So there's some stuff in there that's dark and some stuff in there that's really uncomfortable. But I think that the movie going kind of off the rails like evens that out a bit because I never take this movie terribly seriously. I just can't. I just can't. Even though everybody wants me to, everybody making it wants me to take it seriously. I just can't because it's just too silly. There's just so many scenes that come out of nowhere that is ridiculous. Like, the famous one of Mark Wahlberg just beating his chest, it's laughable. It's so good. Or when he tattoos Nicole Forever on his chest, EVA, by the way. It's outrageous. It's so funny. But again, they're playing it straight, which makes it even funnier to me. And so I wind up just really enjoying this movie, even though I recognize that they're trying to make it straight and that there is some things that should be taken seriously. I shouldn't be laughing at certain things. And I'm not laughing at those things. It's some dark stuff. But when I get the moments of levity that are, again, unintentional, it makes that movie feel balanced out to me. It doesn't feel like quite a slog to watch. This movie doesn't traumatize me or anything like that because of these ridiculous aspects. It winds up evening it out, balancing it out, making it a good time. Obviously, I'm not the only one who had this reaction to it. I was a little bit old for this movie. I was in probably my early 20s when it came out, and it's probably aimed at somebody 5 or 6 years younger than me. But it was a modest hit. It made a lot of money for its budget and everything like that. It wasn't like a monster hit, but it was definitely a successful movie, and it had a bit of a cult reputation that kind of endures to this day. People do have a fond memory of this. I think if you saw it when it came out and you liked it when it came out, I don't think that people going to it now would probably resonate with it quite as much unless you just really like these actors and kind of like seeing them in younger playing these roles, because it is kind of fun to see young Reese Witherspoon and young Marky Mark and young Alyssa Milano. It is kind of cool. I'm definitely in this cult. I do really enjoy this movie. It's, I would say, a guilty pleasure, but you know me, I don't get terribly guilty about liking these things, and I do. I like this movie. I think it's a lot of fun. I hadn't seen it in a long time until I rewatched it for this video, and revisiting it, I still like it. It still, I'll use the word loosely, it holds up for me, and I don't mean that it holds up and that it doesn't feel dated, because it does. It does feel very 90s and very dated in that sense, but everything that tickled me about it when I saw it originally still tickles me now. Like I said, the performances are good, and yet they kind of come off as funny because it's so melodramatic. It's so over the top wrought with angst and scariness and stuff like that, that it just winds up feeling a little bit ludicrous. And it's, for me, that's fun. Now, I do find it interesting that it's a fresher take on the Stalker story, in the sense that it's not told from Marky Mark's point of view. It's not told from Reese Witherspoon, the victim's point of view, but from her dad's point of view. It's mostly William Peterson's movie. Even though it's marketed towards the teens, it really is more about him and his ability to, not be able to protect his daughter and trying to connect with her and being disconnected with her as she rebels and stuff like that, which is interesting stuff. As an adult, I'm, seeing this more from the dad's point of view. It's interesting to me, gender politics aside, because there's something to be said here for telling the story from William Peterson's point of view when Reese Witherspoon is the one being stalked. But the whole family does kind of get pulled into this, and it does kind of go that way. One of the reviews I read about this kind of compared the ending to Straw Dogs, which I think is a very apt comparison and very appropriate for a comparison. Maybe not so appropriate for this movie. By that time, the movie's gone off the rails. It's very kind of hard to believe at that point. It's no longer terribly realistic, and yet I'm still with it. I'm still with the movie. I'm still enjoying it. So I like the choices this movie made, even though arguably those choices were wrong. That's what I like about it. So I don't know. This movie is a hard one for me to recommend exactly for people, because I don't think that newer people that don't have any affection for it, are necessarily going to be able to get into it unless you can get into that spirit that this movie takes itself way too seriously, and that's the fun of it. That's the fun of it. And then recognizing, yeah, there are some very serious things in here that might be triggers for some people. So, be aware of that. But if you can roll with that, this movie's a blast, man. It's a lot of fun. I mean, you got to check it out for yourself and let me know if you like it, because it's just that much fun. So hopefully you'll check it out and come back and let me know what you think. But if you've already seen it, let me know, because I'm obviously praising it quite a bit. Let me know what you think. I'm sure you guys think maybe I'm being a little overly effusive, but I know there are other fans out there. Come out here and support your movie. The next Stalker movie we're talking about today, the graduate level selection, is The Gift. The Gift came out in 2015 and is not to be confused with the 2000 movie The Gift that was directed by Sam Raimi. That's also very good, and that we will pretty much almost certainly be talking about in the future. This is the one that's written and directed by Joel Edgerton and stars Jason Bateman and Rebecca Hall and Joel Edgerton. And it was kind of a movie that got a lot of buzz when it came out. Really positive reviews. People really dug it. But people don't seem like they talk about it as much anymore. And that's a shame, because it's a really excellent movie. If you haven't seen it before, the movie's about a married couple, Jason Bateman and Rebecca Hall, and they're moving back into a new house, and they come across an old school acquaintance of Bateman, played by Joel Edgerton, who makes Bateman very uncomfortable for some reason, even though he seems incredibly nice. But as time goes on, it seems like he's a little too nice. He shows up uninvited. He kind of works his way into the couple's lives, really just kind of overbearingly kind and generous, to the point where it's already bothering Bateman, and it's starting to seem a little bit sinister or dangerous. And as things start to escalate and things start to happen, and the hijinks start to abound, you start to realize, yeah, there's a lot more going on than meets the eye. But to say what it is would be to spoil the movie, and we're not going to do that for you here. But suffice to say, The Gift is an excellent movie that takes its time unfolding. to its benefit. It's the first feature film being directed by Joel Edgerton, and I don't think it's his first writing job. I think he's written other movies before this, but he did write it as well, and he's confident in his filmmaking here. He is very confident in his direction by letting the story take its time to unfold. There's a mystery right up front. You can kind of tell that it's going somewhere dark. You can kind of tell that there's something you don't know that Rebecca Hall doesn't know, and it's going to take its time giving that to you, but it's worth the payoff when you get there. And it's interesting because Rebecca Hall is the focal point of this movie. Even though Bateman and Edgerton are the ones that got the billing because they're the bigger stars, it's really Rebecca Hall's movie. She's really kind of the main character of this, as her husband has this bizarre reaction to a guy that seems harmless enough and very nice. And then, of course, as things go on, you start to see different sides of both characters, all through Rebecca Hall's perspective, and it's great because, again, it's another fresh perspective on the stalker trope, where you're getting somebody who is a victim of the stalking, sort of, but it's like an ancillary victim or collateral damage of the real stalker victim, Jason Bateman's character. So it's a nice, fresh take to see this person who's like the side character, the ancillary victim being the focal point of it. A really cool take on it. And Rebecca Hall crushes this movie. She's really great. I'm not super familiar with a lot of her other work, but she has done a lot of work and she's excellent here. Everybody really good. Bateman playing against type. Side note, Jason Bateman's a big Dodger fan. I used to see him at the Dodger Stadium games all the time until he got much better seats. Realized, I guess, that he was famous and got much better seats. No longer hung out with the regular riffraff. So Jason Bateman, man, come back and hang out with your people. Side note, over. Bateman is playing against type here. He's great. Edgerton doing great work here. Edgerton's somebody that I was never super high on until I started the channel. And seeing more of his work in things like It Comes at Night and stuff like that, he's really, really, really good. And he's only directed 2 movies, and I haven't seen the other movie. This is the only movie I've seen. Excellent directing, excellent directing. It's probably the highlight of the movie for me because he's doing some really interesting things. He's letting the music drop out a lot of the time and letting the scenes play out quiet, which makes it feel more uncomfortable, really underscoring that weird awkwardness of things like when you meet somebody but you don't exactly remember who they are, or like, you feel like you kind of have to invite them in because they've dropped by even though you really don't want to invite them in, and there's the awkward pauses and silences. It really works well. He doesn't let you off the hook by giving you musical cues. It's really, really good. He's also smart enough to just let his actors do their thing, let them work. He just lets them play. He's not trying to be showy or flashy with the direction at all, cool camera angles and stuff like that. He's letting the actors do the work, and they're doing it really, really well. He knows what he's got. He knows he's got a cast that's really strong and really playing off each other well, and he just lets them do their thing. So a lot of the drama, and a lot of the tension, and a lot of the stories unfolding thanks to the actors and their performances. Everybody's bringing A games. Everybody's doing a great job. And Edgerton is smart enough to just let that be the case rather than trying to over direct the movie. He's also assembled a really strong supporting cast. There's Allison Tolman's in there. Katie Selton, I love Katie Selton. Busy Phillips, Wendell Pierce, the Bonk from The Wire. Like, they're all making great appearances, even though they're very small roles. Everybody's very welcome when you see them. Quality cast. Everybody's doing their job, they're doing their work, and it's just kind of fun to see this dissertation on bullying and how it shakes out, especially in light of modern days opinions on bullying, which is even more pronounced and defined than it was back in 2015 when the movie came out. The anti-bullying stances of today really dovetail well with the message and theme of this movie. But it's just a really well-made, tense movie that just, again, it captures that awkwardness and that uncomfortable social feeling of like, you don't really want to be around somebody, but you don't want to be rude. Man, Edgerton just really nails it, both in the performance he's giving and especially in the direction he's giving. The script is very tight. And I like that it does some things I didn't expect. I felt like they were setting up a monkey thing early on, and it doesn't super pay off, but it's not an obvious payoff either. And I liked how they did that. I just like what he's doing across the board with his story, his acting, his directing. I'm really super high on The Gift. And again, in part because it doesn't seem like it gets a lot of love these days. When it came out, it had a lot of critical acclaim. People were buzzing about it. It seemed like it kind of came out of nowhere. Again, Bateman playing against type. It just really seemed like it got a lot of kudos at the time. And it seems like it's kind of faded a bit, and that's unfortunate because it really is a great stalker film, like just one of the pinnacle efforts of or examples of a good stalking movie, because it's just a really nice take of, like, the Rebecca Hall perspective being the main perspective, and then the twist and turns of take, which again I'm doing my best not to spoil the movie, so I won't go into it, but the twists and turns that it takes, and what it means for all the characters is great. It's great stuff. Highly recommend checking it out if you haven't seen it already. And if you have, let me know what you think in the comments below, because I'm very high on The Gift and I feel like more and more people need to see it. And the last Stalker movie that we're going to talk about today, the postgraduate level selection, is Cape Fear. Cape Fear came out in 1991 and is directed by legendary Martin Scorsese and is a remake of the 1962 movie starring Gregory Peck and Robert Mitchum, which is, by the way, excellent. It's a fantastic movie. It's just out of scope for the syllabus. This is a remake of it that is both true to the movie, the original movie, and also diverges greatly from the original movie in an interesting way that I think is very important and is why it's being talked about here on the video today. If you haven't seen it before, the story is about an ex-convict named Max Cady who's done 14 years in prison for the rape and beating of a young girl, and he now is seeking revenge. Now that he's out of prison, he's seeking revenge on the district attorney that did a shoddy job of defending him by ignoring evidence that would have helped either reduce or possibly even exonerate him, or get him out of prison earlier, or avoid prison altogether. And so he is targeting this district attorney and the district attorney's family for revenge. And of course, hijinks abound as they would in a movie like this, but we won't spoil those hijinks because this movie is a great film that is a remake of a great film. And you see that so rarely, that a remake is that good and you can put it on par with the original. And I don't know if I'd say it's better or worse than the original. I'm kind of not even interested in making that determination, because to me, they have some fundamental tonal differences. And that's what I like about this movie so much, is that it doesn't do the same exact thing as the original. It's the same story, the same general concept, and the same general plot. But what I like about this movie so much is that instead of playing in black and white like the original, which literally in black and white, but also kind of had that good guy versus bad guy kind of concept, Martin Scorsese is playing in shades of gray. He's really making this an interesting movie. Not that Max Cady, the villain, is ever not a villain. He is 100% a bad guy, but it's that Nick Nolte, who's playing the district attorney, or the public defender, excuse me, is definitely a complex character. He is not a squeaky clean good guy. There is a lot of stuff about him that comes out during the movie that makes you question how you feel about him. And that's kind of the Scorsese trademark to me, is that he takes these movies and he adds a moral ambiguity to them, or a moral question to them, that makes you makes you question the story. Not that you necessarily question your allegiances or what's going on, or doubt the villainy or whatever, but it's just never clean. He makes you question the rightness, or the righteousness of something, in a way that is sometimes uncomfortable. And I feel like Cape Fear is a little bit of that, because there are points in the movie where you wind up rooting for Robert De Niro's character Max Cady, even though he is clearly the bad guy. He is a villain, but the way that Nick Nolte acts and reacts to him is also despicable. And so at some points you kind of wind up questioning your allegiances, and that's interesting. That's what Scorsese is bringing to this remake, that I think is fresh and interesting to it, is that he brings this moral ambiguity and this questioning aspect to it, where you just don't really know who to like, and there's a kind of nobody to like in this movie. And it's a great cast. Nick Nolte and Robert De Niro, of course. You got Jessica Lange. You've got Juliette Lewis. Juliette Lewis, by the way, got nominated for an Academy Award as a teenager for this movie. She plays Nick Nolte's daughter. And Robert De Niro, of course, also got nominated for this movie, and deservedly so. They're both excellent in this, and their interactions wildly uncomfortable, as as De Niro's character is kind of seducing the 15-year-old Juliette Lewis character. She's not 15 in real life. She's like, I think 18 when they make this movie, but the character is 15. Ooh, it's super uncomfortable, super slimy and gross. So again, you're never going to be on Max Cady's side in this movie, but Like you're also really not on Nick Nolte's side. And honestly, like no, like none of them are really great people. I guess you're kind of on Juliette Lewis's side, but even her, sometimes she does some things. You're just like, oh, girl, what are you doing? And I love that. I love that. Like it's just not clean. It's just a messy, dirty, grimy movie, and you're gonna feel a little dirty after watching it. And I think that's part of like what Scorsese can bring to this is just making it not clean, making it not simple and obvious. I love that about him. I love his work. And it's funny because this movie is kind of more of a mainstream movie than Marty typically will do. And I guess he did this as kind of a thank you to the studio because they had backed Last Temptation of Christ, which another fantastic movie if you haven't seen that. But that was obviously not a mainstream movie by any stretch of the imagination, but they backed him on that one. So he did this one as kind of like a mainstream, I'll give you this to kind of make some money. And it did. It was a big, big mainstream hit. And got some Academy Award recognition. Just because he did a mainstream movie doesn't mean he phoned it in. He really brought his A game for it, and it shows. And it's interesting because this movie was apparently originally supposed to be directed by Steven Spielberg, and Spielberg felt like he is. It's too dark a material for him. It's just not, it's too dark for him. But maybe Marty would be better. And Scorsese at that time had Schindler's List, but he felt like he wasn't really the right person to tell the story of Schindler's List. True, very very self-aware Marty. So they swapped. And Spielberg wound up doing Schindler's List, and Marty did Cape Fear, and we are all the better for it because both those movies are excellent, and they both were made by the right people. And so it's kind of a fun story that I just learned doing the research for this video that I think is fascinating and really excellent, and I loved that story, and I love the results. I love Cape Fear. I love the original. I love Robert Mitchum in the original. I love the remake, and I love Robert De Niro in the remake. I remember seeing this movie the same day that I saw Awakenings. I saw them both in the same day. And it's De Niro doing polar opposite roles and just being marveled at is how good of an actor he is. He is gross in this movie. He is unsettling in this movie. He is scary in this movie. It's an excellent film. And, I don't know if a lot of people these days, the younger people have seen this movie. It's not one that I see get talked about a lot, but it's definitely one that has its reputation. It's, Academy Award nominated movie, and it's a Martin Scorsese film. But I feel like in his oeuvre of just amazing, amazing films, this one kind of gets lost in the shuffle a lot. So I wanted to throw a bit of a spotlight on it just in case for people who aren't aware of this. This is a Martin Scorsese movie that I feel is a must see. It's excellent work by him. It's not his greatest work, for sure. It's not in his top 5 movies, maybe not even in his top 10, but that's just because he's a prolific director who consistently makes great movies for like the last 50 years. So when I say that it's still worth seeing, it's definitely worth seeing. So if you haven't seen it, by all means, check it out, and then we can talk about it in the comments below. But I'm sure some of you have seen it and have some stuff to talk about. So let's talk about that in the comments below too, because I'm super high on Cape Fear. I love this movie, and I'm curious to see if somebody else doesn't. So we can have that conversation in the comments below. So that's going to do it for our exploration into the stalker subgenre. But of course, I've got a few extra credit selections for you because this is a great subgenre with a lot of great movies. So of course, we got a few extra ones to talk about. The first extra credit movie we're going to talk about today is Play Misty for Me. Play Misty for Me came out in 1971. It was written and directed by Clint Eastwood. Clint Eastwood, who also stars in the movie, is making his directorial debut in this movie, and it's noteworthy for that reason because, of course, Eastwood has had a very storied career as a director. He's an accomplished, amazing filmmaker, and this is his humble beginnings, if you will. But it's also noteworthy because it's just a really, really good movie that's maybe a little ahead of its time. But we're going to get into that in just a second. Now, if you haven't seen the movie, it's about a radio disc jockey played by Eastwood who is getting frequent calls from a woman who requests the song Misty be played. And then he winds up meeting her by chance in a bar. She's played by Jessica Walter. And they kind of have a bit of a fling. And he's under the impression that it's kind of a one-night stand thing, but she keeps showing up. She keeps kind of ingratiating herself to him and kind of integrating herself into his life uninvited while he's trying to kind of reconnect with an old flame. And Jessica Walter's character is kind of getting in the way of that. And when he keeps trying to push her away, she gets increasingly more and more unstable, more and more unpredictable, and more violent. And of course, the hijinks abound, as of course they would. And we'll stop there so as not spoil the movie for you. But the movie is a fun ride. And if you are a fan of Fatal Attraction, then you got to check this one out because this is essentially the precursor to Fatal Attraction. It's definitely a movie that Fatal Attraction owes a tremendous amount of debt to because conceptually it's very, very similar. It's a very, very similar situation, and the escalation of events and the devolution of the female stalker in both movies is very, very similar. And Jessica Walter, much like Glenn Close, kills it in this movie. She is really great at doing the unhinged performance, going vacillating from being really sweet to being really psychotic, and just bouncing back and forth and just showing that mental instability in really great ways. She did get nominated for a Golden Globe for this performance, and deservedly so. She is fantastic. Eastwood's doing kind of his Eastwood thing, but it's good here. He's kind of got that cool factor, and he's this, trying to be like the man's man and handle it. But it's clear that he's finding himself being put in a box, and he doesn't know what to do. And it's kind of great to see that the kind of the walls closing in on him a little bit as he's trying to maintain his life and maintain his lifestyle and not have his reputation ruined, and not have his life ruined by this woman who he's made a bad mistake and he knows it and he doesn't know how to get out of it. And it's great because you can see that in his performance and it's wonderful. Now, what's interesting about this is the performances are great. And I'll credit Eastwood to some of that because, again, letting his actors do their job. But he's also really kind of an indulgent director in this case because the movie takes place in Carmel by the Sea, which is where Eastwood's from. And, he plays like a jazz radio station DJ, and Eastwood famously loves jazz. So he's working things in the movie that he loves, which is perfectly fine, but he really lingers on them. Like, I read a review of this movie that said this movie plays like a travel log for Carmel by the Sea, and it does. Carmel's beautiful, and it's really interesting to see what it looked like in 1971. But this movie really is just like almost pornographically showing the shots of Carmel, just gorgeous, seaside filming and this lush, nature scenes and stuff like that. I mean, it's almost hilarious because if you know Eve in the background, you can see what he's doing there. And then there's a scene at a jazz concert, a jazz festival that they just linger on the performances for like two songs. And it's great, but it also feels a little weird pacing wise. But if you're familiar with Eastwood's work, it's not that weird because he is a very languid director. He likes to take his time, let his stories unfold. He's never in a rush to get the story going. He's just letting things unfold naturally, and it usually works extremely well. And I'd say it works extremely well here too. The movie never feels overly long, and in fact, I think it's only like an hour and 45, hour and 50 minutes. It's under 2 hours, and the pacing is good. I never feel like it overstays its welcome, even with these like diversions into scenery and music. It feels well paced. It feels like the movie's moving, and I'm never upset about it. I'm never unhappy about it. I never feel like I'm dragging or looking at my watch because it's just good. It's a good movie. He's got the tension down pat. He's got the shocking, surprising stuff happening that hits you across the face. It's really, really great. There's some fun twists. Occasionally, you might see one coming. I saw some twists coming, but it doesn't matter because you're down for a really good ride, and it's fun to like, especially if you're a Fatal Attraction fan, seeing these tropes, seeing some of these things play out, and seeing like, oh man, Fatal Attraction not nearly as original as you thought it was because so much of it's coming out and playing Misty for me. Eastwood's got some really great interactions with the detective on the case. That's a lot of fun, especially when you're familiar with his Dirty Harry background. It's a lot of fun to see that banter between him and the cop. It's just a well-made movie with some really fun performances, really good. It's creepy, it's unsettling, and it's noteworthy for a lot of reasons. Again, Eastwood's debut as a director, Eastwood's performance, Jessica Walter's performance, the stalker, precursor, the template, if you will, of this, the man being victimized by the stalker one. It's a great time, and because it's an older movie, I think a lot of people maybe aren't familiar with it. So if you haven't seen it, definitely would check it out if I were you, and then come talk to me about it because it's a great movie that it's just older, so it's a little dated, but it's still a really, really good time. The next extra kind of movie I want to talk about is called Alone with Her. Alone with Her came out in 2006 and stars Colin Hanks, son of Tom Hanks, and Ana Claudia Taloncon, and it is a much less fun or exciting movie than something like Play Misty for Me, and is a lot more uncomfortable and a little bit more realistic in terms of like it could happen to you type thing, and makes for a bit of an uncomfortable, less fun watch, but a really good one because it's a really good movie. If you haven't seen it before, the story is all told through like security cameras and spy cameras, kind of like a found footage almost style type of thing. And it's the story of Colin Hanks, who is a stalker who seeks out women and starts to stalk them. And he finds Anna Claudia Taloncon's character and Amy, and fixates on her, and hides cameras in her apartment when he breaks in, and fakes meetings at the coffee shop with her, and it gets really involved in her life and pretends to be her friend, trying to get some sort of relationship with her, it comes sort of closeness to her. And then, of course, as she doesn't really return his feelings, things get dark and things get bad. But of course, we'll stop there so as to not spoil the movie. But the movie is uncomfortable for a lot of reasons. And the first one being that it's all told through these spy cameras, and it's the one mulligan that you have to give the movie is that the spy cameras feel really convenient and easily placed and not found, and just really just always have the perfect angle and stuff like that. And so you just kind of have to give it that. The idea that Colin Hanks is able to use a bag with a camera hidden in it, and film all the stuff that he films without people being always like, why are you pointing that bag at me? You just kind of have to give it that. You just have to let that go. That in order to tell the story, they're going to have to cheat a little bit with the camera work. But if you can get past that, the camera stuff winds up being really unsettling because it feels very real. It's got that authenticity by not being a glossy, frame rate, clean looking film, with film stock or even digital film stock, like it's got that spy cam, security cam realness feeling that you see, and you see like, dash cam videos and stuff like that, which gives it this authenticity that makes it even more uncomfortable. And then just seeing how easy it is for Colin Hanks to worm his way into this girl's life and pretend to be her friend, and like the things that he does to try to ingratiate himself to her. And it's so common. It's such an obvious common thing for a guy to be like the nice guy thing. You've heard of the nice guy thing. And this guy is definitely doing that. And you can feel it. You can feel how uncomfortable she is with it, but she doesn't really know how to be, rude and tell him to go away. So she lets him in too far, even though her instincts are telling her otherwise. And I love that about this movie. I love that it's showing that this is a girl who knows better. She knows, she feels something, and her instincts are telling her that there's something wrong, and yet she feels compelled to push them aside because of like, social convention and trying to be polite and not be, rude or mean. And it's a mistake. And it's interesting to see that aspect played out. And it's great performances by both actors. They're both bringing it, which again just adds to that verisimilitude. It adds to that authenticity. You really feel like you're watching some very uncomfortable private things that you shouldn't be watching, and then you're watching this guy watch them at the same time, and it's just weird and wild and uncomfortable. It's just a really icky feeling. That's why I say this movie's not exactly a fun watch, because it's kind of icky. What's going on is icky, but it's done really, really well. It's done very realistically. It's done very powerfully. And I don't see that the movie has much of a message other than as a cautionary tale, like listen to your instincts. Listen to your instincts. Don't be afraid to be rude. But it's really, maybe not the most important movie, and again, not the most fun of an entertaining movie, but it's a really good movie. And like I said, if you like the feeling, that ick factor and stuff like that, this is going to be a movie for you. But I kind of feel like you should see it no matter what, just because I do feel like it does kind of hint to you, hey man, this is how things go. This is how people do these things. Be aware of this. These are red flags. Don't ignore them. I like that about the movie, and I like the performances. Like, look, Colin Hanks is never going to be his dad, but he has kind of an everyman charm to him that he uses, it plays off of very well here, and kind of turns it on its head. It's really disturbing. And Anna Claudia Townsend, I'm not really familiar with her work. She does a lot of work for international movies, but she's fantastic here. She's just got a wonderful vulnerability, but also a strength to her that is really great, and it makes the movie's events just that much more tragic, that much more sad. But it's a great film, and kind of a little known movie. Not a lot of people are familiar with it. I think it's really good, so I'm telling you about it here to shine a light on it. But be aware, it ain't gonna be for everybody. It's gonna be kind of gross, kind of uncomfortable, and some people, it just might not be for you. And if it's not for you, that's okay. But if you do check it out, come talk to me, man, because again, this is another one that I feel it warrants some conversation, because it's an interesting film with a lot of interesting things going on, and I think people should actually check it out. And the last Stalker movie that we're going to talk about as an extra credit movie today is Ingrid Goes West. Ingrid Goes West came out in 2017. It's one of the more modern movies we're looking at today, and it is admittedly the least horror movie of the bunch here. This is really arguably more of a satirical dark comedy slash drama, and really extremely light on any horror elements, and I freely admit that. But it's my channel, and I don't care, because I think this movie is fantastic, and it is an excellent stalker movie. Excellent stalker movie. So I want to talk about it, so we're going to talk about it. If you haven't seen it before, the movie stars Aubrey Plaza as a social media obsessed girl who fixates on her social media influencers. And in her most current one is Elizabeth Olsen. She goes to the extreme of moving to Elizabeth Olsen's town in LA and trying to work her way into Elizabeth Olsen's life, try to become her friend, to try to be part of her perfect world, only to find out that her perfect Instagram world maybe isn't quite so perfect. And of course, that realization makes her break down and devolve into something very sad and tragic and scary. But we'll leave it at that and not spoil the hijinks for you. But the movie is fantastic. And it's in large part because Aubrey Plaza and Elizabeth Olsen are both fantastic in it. Aubrey Plaza is carrying the movie, and she's great. She really kind of has this weirdly kind of bipolar type thing going on, and she's just giving an unhinged performance, but it's also a rather nuanced performance because you're not just like laughing at her or scared of her, you're feeling sorry for her too. You're buying into the heartbreak of it, even though she is wildly irrational and dangerous. You're still with her, and I credit Aubrey Plaza with that performance, and Elizabeth Olsen doing a great job of the Instagram influencer who's trying to make her life look perfect, but it really isn't. And she plays the perfection aspect of it and the imperfectness of it really, really well. It's kind of almost like a dual role, if you will, and it's done really, 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 really perfectly, frankly. And it is kind of a satire of internet culture, specifically like Instagram and social media culture, but it's so much more than that too. It really is showing not just the dark side of social media, but also like the fragility of people and like their desires and their ambitions, and like what happens when you invest yourself too much into something that is a facade, that is not really real, and how can affect your well-being and your mental health. It's really a cool exploration of that. And part of how they're able to affect that is by making this movie from the stalker's point of view, which is an interesting take on this. Again, we talked about different angles of the stalker motif. And this one being Aubrey Plaza being the main character, the stalker being the main character, and you sympathizing with her is an interesting take. It's an interesting perspective to show, and it gives you, again, a fresh take on things and gives you more sympathy for that character. And by the way, it's got O'Shea Jackson Jr. stealing scenes as Aubrey Plaza's landlord slash boyfriend. It's kind of complicated, but he's a scene stealer in the movie. But it's really Aubrey Plaza's show, and she is bringing it really, really well. Like, if you know Aubrey Plaza, you kind of know her persona, and she's using that to her advantage here. It is kind of part of what she does here, but there's a vulnerability in her performance that you don't usually see from her, and it's great. And she and Elizabeth Olsen are playing off each other wonderfully. They have chemistry when they're supposed to have chemistry, and then they don't when they're not, and it's great. And like I said, it's not really a scary movie. It's really, honestly, more tragically sad, but also really, really funny. And so it's kind of a weird tone, but it's a tone that works for the movie because it's kind of a weird character. So the tone matches that. And it's just another one of those movies that I really like that, kind of had a little bit of a buzz, but doesn't seem like it's a super popular movie. It's super well known. And it kind of seems like it's under the radar. So I wanted to shine a light on that one too. And again, a really great stalker movie, a really great example of showing how a stalker operates, how they ingratiate themselves to somebody and integrate themselves into their life, and how they lie, and the stories they tell, and the techniques they use, and then but also understanding the psychology behind it and the tragedy behind it and why they're doing it, and maybe not the greatest thing to glamorize or really sympathize with this stalker, not glamorous at all, but it's an interesting take on the movie, and it makes it feel fresh and original, and I absolutely love it. Granted, I'm a Plaza fan, and I like Elizabeth Olsen too, but definitely it's worth seeing. So if you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. I really don't think you'll be disappointed. I really think you'll be very pleasantly surprised by how good this movie is, and also surprised like I am that it's not more popular. So check it out if you haven't seen it. We'll talk about it in the comments below. And if you have seen it, of course, let me know what you think. And we'll talk more about it too. But that's going to do it for all of our, stalker movies today. There are so many more we could talk about. And if you can think of some that I haven't talked about that I haven't talked about in other videos, because again, they pop up elsewhere a lot, go ahead and leave those in the comments below because, we can talk about them. And if I haven't seen them, I'm going to be adding them to our to watch list and I'll check them out later. But for now, we're going to check out a Horror True Pursuit card because it's that time where I like to look at a card and try to answer it here on camera. And because we're talking about stalkers, which also tend to be slashers or killers, let's go ahead and do a killer category question. And the question is this. In 1925's The Phantom of the Opera was originally released in what audio format? A silent or sound horror film? Well, I know the answer to this question, and I'm also a little bit bummed by the way that they phrased the question because they gave you basically a choice, a 50-50 choice, rather than just letting you guess the answer, which I would have known anyways. However, the way that the question is phrased, if they didn't give you this 50-50 choice, I don't think you'd understand what they're trying to ask you for. I don't think it'd be super clear if they just said the Phantom of Opera was originally released in what audio format. I think I would be a little confused by that. I don't think I'd understand exactly what they're asking for in an answer. So I think it's kind of necessary that they give you what they gave you in terms of the selection, but I think it also makes the choices makes the answer very, very easy, very, very obvious. I mean, and even if it's not obvious to you, you got a 50-50 chance of getting it right. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time, hemming and hawing and buying you time so you can think about this because it's one or the other. And honestly, if you're thinking about it logically, kind of deductive reasoning, you should be able to figure out which one this is just by, deductive reasoning. So, lock in your answer. I'm going to give you my answer. It is a silent film, of course, and given the time period that it came out, that should be fairly obvious when they give you a choice. And also because, like, who's going to ask you to tell you that it's a sound film? Who's going to ask you that? But let's just double check in the card. And yeah, a silent horror film. That's what it says, a silent horror film. So that one, not the most exciting question. I mean, yeah, I like that it's asking about classic horror. I have seen the 1925 Phantom of the Opera. It is actually excellent. We may wind up talking about that at some point in the future, but we'll see. But did you get it right? I hope you did because it's not that hard. If you got it wrong, so be it. But I know judgment here, of course. But maybe check out that movie then because it's really, really good. And then check out the movies we talked about today. If you haven't seen any of these, I highly recommend all of them. Though some of them might not be for everybody, I love every movie that we talked about today. So hopefully you'll check them out and we can talk about them. But until you do, and until we do something completely different next week, I'll just say, class dismissed.